The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. Subject line, Transition Discussion, please join us in conference room B at 2 p.m. today. I knew before I even opened it. After 15 years of building Meridian Tech Solutions from a struggling startup into a $200 million powerhouse, they were about to tell me my services were no longer needed. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Henderson, and I used to be the Senior Vice President of Business Development at Meridian Tech Solutions. Used to be. Those 3 words taste bitter even now, 6 months after everything went down. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about getting fired. It's about what happened next. Meridian wasn't always the corporate machine it became. When I joined in 2009, we were 37 people crammed into a converted warehouse in Austin, Texas. The founder, David Castellanos, had this vision of creating software solutions that would revolutionize how mid-sized manufacturing companies manage their supply chains. It was ambitious, maybe even crazy, but that's exactly why I took the job. I was 28, hungry, and tired of working for companies where innovation went to die in committee meetings. David offered me equity, creative freedom, and the chance to build something from scratch. Most importantly, he offered me the opportunity to prove that relationships matter more than algorithms when it comes to closing deals. Those first 5 years were brutal but exhilarating. I worked 18-hour days, flew to 3 different states every week, and slept in more airport hotels than I care to remember. But I was building something. Every client I brought in, every partnership I negotiated, every deal I closed was another brick in the foundation of what Meridian could become. The breakthrough came in 2014 when I landed our first major enterprise client, Rockwell Manufacturing, a $2 billion automotive parts supplier based in Detroit. Their CEO, Patricia Vance, had been burned by 3 different software implementations in the past decade. She was skeptical, demanding, and absolutely brilliant. It took me 8 months of presentations, pilot programs, and relationship building to earn her trust. When Rockwell signed a $12 million, 5-year contract with Meridian, everything changed. Suddenly, we weren't just another tech startup hoping to survive until the next funding round. We were a legitimate player in the enterprise software space, with a client base that actually mattered. But landing Rockwell was just the beginning. Patricia introduced me to Michael Chen, the procurement director at Titanium Industries. Michael introduced me to Sarah Rodriguez at Continental Logistics. Sarah connected me with James Morrison at Apex Manufacturing. Each relationship led to another, each deal opened doors to bigger opportunities. By 2017, my network had grown into something powerful. I knew the decision makers at 43 major manufacturing companies across North America. More importantly, they knew me. They trusted me. When these executives had problems, they called me directly, not Meridian's main number. When they needed advice on technology investments, they asked for my opinion, not a sales presentation. David understood the value of what I'd built. He promoted me to Senior VP, gave me a team of 12 business development specialists, and essentially let me run my division like my own company. The results spoke for themselves. Between 2017 and 2022, my team was responsible for 73% of Meridian's new revenue. We brought in $127 million in new contracts during that period, but success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds stupidity. The first sign of trouble came in early 2023 when Meridian hired Rebecca Walsh as Chief Operating Officer. Rebecca came from TechFlow Dynamics, one of those soulless consulting firms that specializes in operational efficiency and strategic restructuring. In other words, she was an expert at cutting costs and eliminating what she considered redundant positions. Rebecca was 34, Stanford MBA, and had never actually sold anything in her life. But she had charts. Beautiful, colorful charts that showed how Meridian could increase profit margins by 23% through workforce optimization and generational talent integration. She used phrases like digital native capabilities and agile methodology implementation in every meeting. David was mesmerized. Here was someone who could speak the language of the venture capital firms that were pressuring him to prepare for an eventual IPO. Someone who understood scalable business models and data-driven decision frameworks. Someone who made him feel like a real CEO instead of just a guy who got lucky with a good idea. The writing was on the wall, but I chose to ignore it. I was too busy closing deals and managing my team to pay attention to the political maneuvering happening in the executive suite. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was trusting that 15 years of loyalty and results would mean something when push came to shove. The changes started small. Rebecca instituted new reporting requirements that doubled the administrative burden on my team. She mandated that all client communications go through a new CRM system that was clunky and inefficient. She hired 3 business development analysts who were supposed to help identify optimization opportunities in our sales process. What these analysts were really doing was documenting everything I did. Every client call, every meeting, every relationship I'd built over the past decade. They were creating a playbook, mapping my network, and figuring out how to replicate my success without actually needing me. The final blow came during the Q3 strategic planning meeting in September 2024. Rebecca presented her masterpiece, a comprehensive restructuring plan that would leverage our existing client relationships while transitioning to a more sustainable, youth-oriented business development approach. Translation: they wanted to fire me and replace me with 3 recent college graduates who would work for half my salary. Marcus has done incredible work building our client base, Rebecca said, not even bothering to look at me as she spoke. But we need to think about the future. Our client demographic is aging, and we need team members who understand how the next generation of executives thinks and operates. She clicked to her next slide, which showed a comparison between my salary and benefits package versus what they could pay 3 junior business development associates. The math was compelling, at least on paper. We're not questioning Marcus's contributions, David added, finally making eye contact with me. But we need to position ourselves for long-term growth. The business development function needs fresh perspectives and digital-first approaches. I sat there listening to them talk about me like I wasn't in the room. 15 years of building their company, 15 years of relationships and deals and late nights and missed family dinners, and they were reducing me to a line item on a spreadsheet, but I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just asked one question: when? We'd like to make the transition by the end of November, Rebecca replied. That gives us time to implement proper knowledge transfer protocols and ensure continuity with our key accounts. Knowledge transfer protocols. They actually thought they could download 15 years of relationship building into a PowerPoint presentation. I nodded, shook hands with everyone around the table, and walked back to my office. My assistant, Jennifer Park, took one look at my face and quietly closed the door behind me. They're letting you go, she said. It wasn't a question. End of November. They want to focus on young talent. Jennifer had been with me for 8 years. She knew my clients almost as well as I did, had scheduled thousands of meetings and calls, had watched me build relationships from scratch and turn them into million-dollar deals. She also knew that Rebecca had been interviewing candidates for my position for the past 6 weeks. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked out my office window at the Austin skyline, at the city where I'd spent 15 years building something I thought would last forever. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list. I'm going to do exactly what they asked, I said. I'm going to transfer my knowledge. Over the next 8 weeks, I conducted the most thorough knowledge transfer in corporate history. I documented every client relationship, every ongoing negotiation, every potential opportunity in my pipeline. I created detailed profiles of key decision-makers, complete with personal information, communication preferences, and relationship histories. I introduced Rebecca's 3 new hires to my most important clients. I walked them through our proposal processes, our pricing strategies, our competitive positioning. I shared insights about industry trends, client concerns, and market opportunities that I'd accumulated over 15 years in the field. Most importantly, I made sure that every single person who mattered knew exactly what was happening. Meridian is transitioning to a new business development approach, I explained to Patricia Vance during our final lunch meeting in Detroit. They're bringing in fresh talent to better serve your evolving needs. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Fresh talent? Marcus, you've been handling our account for 10 years. You know our business better than half our own employees. Change is inevitable, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I'm confident the new team will serve you well. But Patricia wasn't stupid. Neither were Michael Chen, Sarah Rodriguez, James Morrison, or any of the other 43 executives who had come to depend on me over the years. They understood what was happening, even if I couldn't say it directly. My last day at Meridian was November 30th, 2024. Rebecca organized a small farewell reception in the conference room where they delivered my termination notice 8 weeks earlier. David gave a speech about my contributions to the company and wished me well in my future endeavors. The 3 new business development associates presented me with a gift card to a steakhouse. I thanked everyone, cleaned out my office, and drove home to my wife Amanda and our 2 kids. That night, over dinner, my 8-year-old daughter Emma asked me why I looked sad. Daddy's just thinking about work, sweetheart, I told her. Are you going to get a new job? She asked. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I smiled and ruffled her hair. Something like that. What I didn't tell Emma, or Amanda, or anyone else that night, was that I'd already started my new job. In fact, I'd been working on it for the past 8 weeks, during every knowledge transfer meeting, every client introduction, every seemingly cooperative conversation with Rebecca and her team. I'd been planting seeds. Tiny, almost invisible seeds of doubt about Meridian's new direction. Seeds of concern about the company's commitment to its existing clients. Seeds of uncertainty about whether the new team would be able to provide the same level of service and expertise that these clients had come to expect. The seeds were already starting to sprout. On December 3rd, 3 days after my departure, I received a text message from Patricia Vance. "Marcus, can we talk? Having some concerns about the new Meridian team." On December 5th, Michael Chen called me directly. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I wanted to get your perspective on something." On December 8th, Sarah Rodriguez sent me an email. "Marcus, I know you're no longer with Meridian, but I value your opinion and would love to buy you lunch next time you're in Phoenix." By December 15th, I'd received similar messages from 17 different executives. All of them wanted to talk. All of them had concerns. All of them were starting to question whether Meridian was still the right partner for their companies. Rebecca's fresh-faced business development team was drowning. They had my documentation, my processes, and my client profiles, but they didn't have my relationships. They couldn't answer questions about projects from 3 years ago. They didn't understand the nuances of each client's business model. They couldn't provide the strategic insights that these executives had come to expect from their Meridian point of contact. Most importantly, they didn't have 15 years of trust and credibility to fall back on when things got complicated, and things were about to get very complicated indeed. December was supposed to be Meridian's strongest month. The end of fiscal year always brought a surge of contract renewals and last-minute deals as companies rushed to finalize their technology budgets before January. Rebecca had projected $18 million in Q4 revenue, largely based on the pipeline I'd built over the previous months. Instead, December became their nightmare. The first domino fell on December 12th when Rockwell Manufacturing requested an emergency meeting. Patricia Vance flew down to Austin personally, bringing her entire procurement team. I wasn't there, of course, but Jennifer Park, who had also been transitioned out 2 weeks after my departure, still had contacts inside Meridian. The meeting lasted 4 hours and ended with Patricia walking out without signing their renewal contract. They sent 3 kids who couldn't answer basic questions about our integration timeline, Jennifer told me over coffee that afternoon. Patricia asked about the customization requirements we discussed in September, and they had to schedule a follow-up meeting just to research what she was talking about. The Rockwell account represented $15 million over 5 years. Without that renewal, Rebecca's Q4 projections were already in ruins, but Rockwell was just the beginning. I'd spent the first 2 weeks of December having informal conversations with my former clients. Nothing aggressive, nothing that could be construed as poaching or industrial espionage. Just old friends catching up, discussing industry trends, sharing concerns about the rapidly changing technology landscape. Michael Chen invited me to Titanium Industries' annual strategy retreat in Aspen. Sarah Rodriguez asked me to speak at Continental Logistics Leadership Conference in Denver. James Morrison wanted my input on Apex Manufacturing's digital transformation roadmap. Suddenly, I was busier than I'd been in months, and I wasn't even officially working anywhere. These weren't sales calls. They were relationship maintenance meetings that happened to involve discussing each company's current vendor relationships and future technology needs. Purely coincidental conversations about whether their existing partners were still capable of providing the level of service and innovation these companies required to stay competitive. During my lunch with Patricia in Detroit, she outlined her frustrations with Meridian's new team. "They scheduled our quarterly review meeting for 30 minutes, she said, stabbing her salad with more force than necessary. 30 minutes, Marcus. We've been paying them $3 million annually for 5 years, and they think they can review our entire strategic partnership in half an hour. Maybe they're just trying to be efficient," I suggested, maintaining my neutral tone. "Efficient?" Patricia laughed bitterly. "They spent the first 15 minutes asking me to explain our manufacturing process." "Our manufacturing process, Marcus. The same process we've been using since 2019. The same process that's documented in 12 different reports they apparently never bothered to read." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I asked them about the API integration timeline we discussed in October, and they looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. One of them actually asked what an API was. I nodded sympathetically. "Growing pains, I suppose. They'll get up to speed eventually." "Will they?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. Because I'm not running a charity here, Marcus. I don't have time to train Meridian staff on how to do their jobs. I need partners who understand my business and can anticipate my needs, not babysitters who require constant hand-holding. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from Meridian's declining response times to their inability to provide strategic insights during recent industry disruptions. Patricia never directly asked me to recommend alternative vendors, but she made it clear that Rockwell was actively evaluating their options. Similar conversations were happening across my entire network. Michael Chen complained about Meridian's junior team missing critical details in their latest proposal. Sarah Rodriguez was frustrated by their inability to customize solutions for Continental Logistics' unique supply chain requirements. James Morrison questioned whether Meridian still had the technical expertise to support Apex's expansion into international markets. Each conversation planted deeper doubts about Meridian's capabilities. More importantly, each conversation reinforced these executives' confidence in my judgment and expertise. They might not be able to work with me directly anymore, but they still valued my opinion about technology vendors and strategic partnerships. By mid-December, I was receiving daily calls from former clients seeking advice about their vendor relationships. Not just Meridian-related issues, but broader questions about their technology strategies and partnership decisions. These executives had come to rely on my insights over the years, and my departure from Meridian hadn't changed their trust in my judgment. That's when I realized the true scope of the opportunity Rebecca had handed me. She hadn't just fired me. She'd freed me from the constraints of representing a single company. Instead of being limited to promoting Meridian's solutions, I could now provide genuinely objective advice about the entire technology landscape. I could recommend the best solutions for each client's specific needs, regardless of which vendor provided them, and I knew exactly which vendors were hungry for enterprise clients with multi-million-dollar budgets. Thomas Bradley ran business development for Nexus Systems, Meridian's biggest competitor. We'd competed against each other for years, maintaining a grudging professional respect despite being on opposite sides of countless deals. When I called him on December 18, he was initially suspicious. "Marcus Henderson," he said, his voice cautious. "I heard about your departure from Meridian. Congratulations on your freedom, I suppose." "Thanks, Thomas. I was hoping we could grab lunch sometime. I've got some insights about the enterprise market that might interest you." There was a long pause. "What kind of insights?" "The kind that comes from spending 15 years building relationships with 43 major manufacturing companies," I replied. "The kind that might help Nexus understand why some of these companies are reconsidering their vendor partnerships." Thomas agreed to meet me the next day. Nexus Systems had always been Meridian's shadow. They provided similar solutions to similar clients, but they'd never been able to break into the enterprise accounts I'd locked up for Meridian. Their software was arguably better in some areas, their pricing was more competitive, and their technical support was superior. But they lacked the relationships necessary to get their foot in the door with major manufacturers. Over lunch at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Austin, I laid out the situation for Thomas. Meridian just made the biggest strategic mistake in their corporate history, I explained. They've convinced themselves that their client relationships belong to the company, not to the people who built them. They think they can replace 15 years of trust and expertise with entry-level enthusiasm and fresh perspectives. Thomas listened intently as I described the chaos at Meridian, the client complaints, and the growing dissatisfaction among their enterprise accounts. "These companies are actively looking for alternatives," I continued. "But they need someone they trust to guide them through the transition. Someone who understands their businesses and can recommend solutions that actually fit their needs." "And you think Nexus could be that solution?" Thomas asked. "I think Nexus could be one of several solutions, depending on each client's specific requirements," I corrected. "But yes, for many of these accounts, Nexus would be a significant upgrade from what they're currently getting from Meridian." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "What exactly are you proposing, Marcus?" "I'm proposing that we help each other," I said. "You need access to enterprise clients. I need these clients to find better vendors. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You want to join Nexus?" "I want to consult for multiple companies, including Nexus. I want to provide objective advice to my former clients about their technology needs. And I want to make sure they have access to vendors who can actually serve them properly." Thomas smiled for the first time during our conversation. "You want to become a technology broker?" "I want to become a strategic advisor," I clarified. "Someone who can help manufacturers navigate an increasingly complex vendor landscape. Someone who can connect great companies with great solutions, regardless of corporate politics or internal restructuring decisions." By the end of lunch, Thomas and I had outlined a preliminary consulting arrangement. Nexus would pay me a retainer to provide market insights and client intelligence. In return, I would introduce them to enterprise prospects who might benefit from their solutions. If those introductions led to signed contracts, I would receive additional compensation based on the deal size. Similar conversations with other Meridian competitors followed over the next week. Dataflow Technologies needed help breaking into the automotive sector. Enterprise Solutions Group wanted to expand their presence in logistics and transportation. Industrial Software Alliance was looking for opportunities in aerospace manufacturing. Each company brought different strengths to different market segments. Each had solutions that would genuinely benefit specific types of manufacturers. And each was willing to compensate me generously for facilitating introductions to qualified prospects. By December 28, I had consulting agreements with 6 different technology companies. I wasn't working for any single vendor, which meant I could provide truly objective recommendations based on each client's actual needs rather than corporate sales quotas. More importantly, I had created a sustainable business model that leveraged the network I'd spent 15 years building, while providing genuine value to both clients and vendors. The beauty of the arrangement was its transparency. When Patricia Vance called me on December 30th to discuss Rockwell's technology strategy for 2025, I was completely honest about my new role. I should mention that I'm now working as an independent consultant, I told her. I provide strategic advice to manufacturers about their technology partnerships, and I also work with various vendors to help them understand market needs. If you'd like recommendations about alternative solutions, I can provide objective assessments of different options. Patricia was quiet for a moment. So you're not tied to any single vendor? Correct. My only obligation is to provide honest advice that serves your best interests. If that means recommending a vendor I don't work with, then that's what I'll recommend. That's exactly what I've been looking for, she said. Someone who can give me straight answers without a sales agenda. We scheduled a meeting for January 8 to discuss Rockwell's vendor evaluation process. Patricia wanted comprehensive assessments of 5 different technology providers, including detailed comparisons of their capabilities, pricing, and implementation timelines. Similar requests came in from Michael Chen, Sarah Rodriguez, James Morrison, and 15 other executives during the first week of January. All of them wanted independent advice about their vendor relationships. All of them were willing to pay consulting fees for objective strategic guidance. None of them mentioned Meridian directly, but the implications were clear. They had lost confidence in their current provider and were actively seeking alternatives. And meanwhile, Rebecca's team was struggling with more than just client relations. According to Jennifer's sources inside Meridian, the 3 junior business development associates were overwhelmed by the complexity of managing enterprise accounts. They were spending most of their time trying to understand existing client relationships. Instead of developing new business, the Rockwell renewal had been postponed indefinitely. Titanium Industries was requesting a complete renegotiation of their service level agreements. Continental Logistics had put their expansion project on hold pending a comprehensive vendor review. Apex Manufacturing was threatening to terminate their contract early due to unresolved technical issues. Meridian's Q4 revenue projections had dropped from $18 million to $11 million, and their Q1 2025 pipeline was virtually empty. Rebecca's youth-oriented business development approach was generating more client complaints than new opportunities, but the real crisis was still coming. On January 15, I submitted my first batch of vendor recommendations to my consulting clients. Rockwell Manufacturing received a detailed assessment recommending Nexus systems for their core integration needs and Dataflow Technologies for their reporting requirements. Titanium Industries got a proposal for enterprise solutions. Group's supply chain optimization platform. Continental Logistics received recommendations for 3 different vendors depending on their specific operational requirements. Each recommendation was thoroughly researched, completely objective, and perfectly suited to each client's needs and budget constraints. Each would provide significantly better value than what these companies were currently receiving from Meridian, and each recommendation came with my personal endorsement, backed by 15 years of trusted advisory relationships. The responses were immediate and enthusiastic. These executives trusted my judgment completely, and they were eager to explore alternatives that could solve their current frustrations with vendor management. By January 20th, 6 of my former clients had initiated formal vendor evaluation processes. By January 25th, 3 had requested proposals from Meridian's competitors. By January 30th, Nexus Systems had received qualified leads worth over $35 million in potential revenue. Rebecca's sustainable, youth-oriented business development approach was about to face its first real test. Her team would be competing against superior vendors, recommended by a trusted advisor, to clients who were already dissatisfied with Meridian's service. The foundation she thought she'd inherited was crumbling beneath her feet, and she didn't even realize it yet. February brought the kind of Austin winter that makes you forget why people complain about Texas weather. Clear skies, comfortable temperatures, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of early wildflowers. It was perfect weather for conducting business meetings on restaurant patios, which had become my new office environment. I was having lunch with Catherine Mills, the Chief Technology Officer at Precision Components, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Park, emergency meeting at Meridian this morning. David looked like he hadn't slept in days. Catherine noticed my distraction. Everything all right, Marcus? Just keeping tabs on industry developments, I replied, sliding my phone back into my jacket pocket. You were telling me about your integration challenges with the current inventory management system. Catherine had been wrestling with Meridian's software for 8 months. The implementation had been plagued with delays, cost overruns, and functionality gaps that Meridian's new team couldn't seem to address. What should have been a 6-month project was approaching its first anniversary with no end in sight. The worst part isn't even the technical issues, Catherine continued, her frustration evident in every word. It's the complete lack of communication. I send detailed technical specifications to their project manager, and I get back generic responses that make it obvious they didn't even read what I sent. Have you considered bringing in additional technical expertise? I asked. There are specialists who focus specifically on inventory management integrations. Are you thinking of anyone in particular? I pulled out my tablet and showed her a case study from Industrial Software Alliance. They had recently completed a nearly identical integration for a manufacturing company in Ohio, finishing the project 3 weeks ahead of schedule and $200,000 under budget. This is exactly what we need, Catherine said, studying the technical specifications. How quickly could they assess our current situation? I can arrange an initial consultation within the week, I replied. No obligation, just a technical review to identify potential solutions. Catherine agreed immediately. Precision Components represented another $8 million account that Meridian was about to lose, not through competitive pressure or market changes, but through sheer incompetence. The pattern was repeating itself across my entire network. Meridian's junior team wasn't just failing to develop new business, they were actively destroying existing relationships through missed deadlines, poor communication, and fundamental misunderstandings of their clients' needs. Meanwhile, my consulting practice was expanding faster than I had anticipated. Word was spreading through the manufacturing community about my new role as an independent advisor. Executives who had never worked with Meridian were reaching out for guidance on vendor selection and technology strategy. Robert Chung, the VP of Operations at Stellar Manufacturing, contacted me after hearing about my work from Patricia Vance. Stellar was evaluating enterprise software providers for a complete digital transformation initiative worth $25 million over 3 years. Patricia spoke very highly of your analytical approach, Robert told me during our initial phone conversation. She said you provide genuinely objective assessments without the typical vendor bias. That's the goal, I confirmed. My compensation comes from consulting fees, not sales commissions, so I can focus on finding the right solutions rather than pushing specific products. Robert hired me to conduct a comprehensive vendor evaluation for Stellar's transformation project. The scope included assessing 8 different technology providers, analyzing their technical capabilities, comparing implementation methodologies, and providing detailed recommendations based on Stellar's specific operational requirements. The project would take 6 weeks and generate $75,000 in consulting fees. More importantly, it would likely result in contracts worth millions of dollars for whichever vendors I recommended. Meridian wasn't even on the evaluation list. By mid-February, I was managing consulting projects for 12 different manufacturing companies. Some were existing relationships from my Meridian days, but increasingly, new clients were finding me through referrals and industry recommendations. Each project reinforced my reputation as a trusted advisor who could navigate the complex vendor landscape without hidden agendas or sales pressures. Each successful recommendation strengthened my credibility and generated additional referral opportunities. The financial results were exceeding my most optimistic projections. January had generated $120,000 in consulting revenue. February was tracking toward $180,000. March already had $95,000 in confirmed projects. With additional proposals pending. I was earning more in 3 months as an independent consultant than I had made in my final year at Meridian, while working with more interesting clients on more challenging projects, but the money wasn't the real satisfaction. The real satisfaction was watching Rebecca's strategic restructuring collapse in real time. The emergency meeting Jennifer had mentioned was apparently focused on Meridian's deteriorating client retention numbers. According to her sources, they had lost $12 million in confirmed renewals during January, with another $18 million at risk during the first quarter. David was reportedly furious about the revenue shortfall, but Rebecca was attributing the problems to market volatility and transitional challenges inherent in organizational change. She was still convinced that her approach would eventually prove successful once the team gained more experience. What Rebecca didn't understand was that enterprise software sales isn't a learn-on-the-job profession. These clients had million-dollar budgets and complex technical requirements. They needed vendors who could provide immediate expertise and proven solutions, not enthusiasm and fresh perspectives. The 3 junior associates she had hired were talented individuals with impressive academic credentials, but they lacked the industry knowledge and relationship skills necessary to manage enterprise accounts. They were trying to learn manufacturing processes, supply chain complexities, and integration methodologies while simultaneously managing client relationships worth millions of dollars. It was like asking medical students to perform brain surgery. Because they had studied anatomy, the situation became critical on February 22 when Titanium Industries formally terminated their contract with Meridian. Michael Chen's decision came after Meridian's team failed to resolve a critical system outage that had shut down 2 production lines for 6 hours. They kept telling me they needed to escalate the issue to their technical support team, Michael explained during our emergency consultation call. But their technical support team didn't understand our manufacturing process well enough to diagnose the problem. We ended up fixing it ourselves using documentation from the previous integration team. The termination triggered penalty clauses worth $1.8 million, money that Meridian would have to refund to Titanium Industries. More damaging was the precedent it set for other clients experiencing similar technical issues. Word of Titanium's termination spread quickly through the manufacturing community. Other Meridian clients began questioning whether they should continue with a vendor that couldn't provide reliable technical support for mission-critical systems. Continental Logistics accelerated their vendor evaluation timeline after hearing about Titanium's experience. Apex Manufacturing demanded immediate meetings to address their own unresolved technical issues. Rockwell Manufacturing formally notified Meridian that they would not be renewing their contract when it expired in June. By the end of February, Meridian had confirmed contract terminations worth $31 million, with another $47 million in renewals classified as at risk on their internal tracking spreadsheets. David finally realized that Rebecca's restructuring had created an existential crisis for the company. According to Jennifer's sources, he had demanded a complete assessment of their client retention strategy and was considering reversing some of the personnel changes made during the previous quarter, but the damage was already too extensive to repair with simple policy adjustments. The problem wasn't just that Meridian had lost experienced staff, they had lost the institutional knowledge and client relationships that took years to develop. You can't replace 15 years of industry expertise with training seminars and process documentation. More critically, they had lost credibility with their most important clients during a period when those clients were actively evaluating alternative vendors. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild in the enterprise software market. My consulting clients were making their vendor selection decisions based on demonstrated competence and proven track records, not corporate promises and recovery plans. They needed partners who could deliver results immediately, not vendors who might eventually figure out how to provide adequate service. The first major contract award came on March 8 when Precision Components selected Industrial Software Alliance to replace Meridian's failed inventory management system. The implementation contract was worth $6.2 million over 2 years, with additional maintenance and support fees projected at $400,000 annually. Catherine Mills personally called to thank me for the recommendation. Your technical assessment was absolutely accurate, she said. Industrial Software Alliance understood our requirements immediately and provided solutions we hadn't even considered. This is exactly what we needed. The success at Precision Components generated immediate referrals. Catherine recommended my services to colleagues at 3 other manufacturing companies, all of whom were struggling with similar vendor relationship issues. 2 days later, Stellar Manufacturing awarded a $14.8 million digital transformation contract to Nexus Systems, based on my comprehensive vendor evaluation. Robert Chong was so impressed with the analysis that he hired me to oversee the entire implementation process, generating an additional $125,000 in consulting fees over the next 18 months. This is the most thorough vendor assessment I've ever seen, Robert told me during our contract signing meeting. You identified capabilities and integration opportunities that none of the vendors had even mentioned in their proposals. The Stellar project became a showcase for my consulting methodology. The implementation proceeded smoothly, finished ahead of schedule, and delivered measurable operational improvements within the first month of deployment. Word of the success spread throughout the manufacturing community, establishing my reputation as someone who could not only identify the right vendors but also ensure successful project outcomes. March became a turning point in multiple ways. My consulting revenue reached $210,000 for the month, driven by a combination of vendor evaluation projects, implementation oversight contracts, and strategic advisory retainers. More importantly, my client base had expanded beyond former Meridian accounts to include companies across multiple industries and geographic regions. Manufacturing executives in Detroit, Chicago, Phoenix, and Dallas were seeking my guidance on technology decisions worth tens of millions of dollars. I was becoming a recognized authority in enterprise software selection and implementation, with a reputation that extended far beyond my original network of relationships. Meanwhile, Meridian's situation continued deteriorating. They had laid off 12 employees during March, including 2 of Rebecca's business development analysts and the entire marketing communications team. David had reportedly brought in external consultants to assess their competitive positioning and client retention strategies. The most telling development was a job posting that appeared on LinkedIn in late March: Senior Vice President, Business Development, established enterprise software company seeks experienced leader to rebuild client relationships and restore revenue growth. They were looking for someone exactly like me. The irony was perfect. After spending months convincing themselves that fresh talent was superior to experienced expertise, they were desperately seeking someone with the exact qualifications they had eliminated from their organization. But it was too late for Meridian to simply hire their way out of the crisis Rebecca had created. Their reputation in the manufacturing community was severely damaged. Their client base was hemorrhaging to competitors. Their revenue projections for the year had been slashed by 40%. Most critically, their former clients had found better alternatives and were actively recommending those alternatives to their colleagues and partners. The network effect that had once worked in Meridian's favor was now working against them. Every successful implementation by Nexus Systems, Dataflow Technologies, or Industrial Software Alliance created additional opportunities for these competitors while further undermining confidence in Meridian's capabilities. By the end of March, 6 of my consulting clients had terminated their Meridian contracts and awarded new business to vendors I had recommended. The total value of these contract transfers exceeded $58 million, representing nearly 30% of Meridian's annual revenue. The avalanche I had triggered 4 months earlier was gaining momentum, and there was nothing Rebecca or David could do to stop it. April in Austin brings thunderstorms that roll across the hill country like artillery barrages, sudden and overwhelming. I was watching one such storm approach from my home office window when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in 4 months: David Castellanos. Marcus. His voice was strained, lacking the confident tone I remembered from our years working together. I was hoping we could talk. Are you available for lunch today? I checked my calendar, which was packed with client calls and vendor meetings. I could squeeze in an hour around 2 o'clock. Where did you have in mind? Somewhere private. How about that Italian place on South Lamar? The one with the back room. David was clearly planning a conversation he didn't want overheard by industry colleagues. I agreed to meet him at Lombardi's, curious to hear what desperation sounded like. When it came from someone who had once held my career in his hands, the restaurant was nearly empty during the mid-afternoon lull. David had arrived early and secured a corner table in the back dining room, away from the handful of other patrons. He looked older than I remembered, with gray creeping into his hairline and stress lines etched around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know things ended badly between us, and I wanted to clear the air." "Things didn't end badly, David. You made a business decision. I respected it and moved on." He winced at my neutral tone. "Marcus, I'll be direct. We made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. I made a catastrophic mistake." "What kind of mistake?" David pulled out his phone and showed me a spreadsheet filled with red numbers. "We're down 63% in revenue year over year. We've lost 18 major clients since December. Our Q2 projections are showing a $23 million shortfall." I studied the numbers without expression. The decline was even worse than I had anticipated. "That's unfortunate. What does Rebecca think is causing the downturn?" "Rebecca is no longer with the company," David said quietly. "We parted ways last week." That was news. According to my sources, Rebecca had been doubling down on her restructuring strategy as recently as mid-March, blaming the revenue problems on market conditions and competitive pressures. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, maintaining my diplomatic tone. "Change is always difficult." David leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I need your help. The company is hemorrhaging clients, and I can't figure out how to stop it. Every major account we lose seems to end up with one of our competitors, usually with implementations that go perfectly. It's like someone is orchestrating our destruction." I met his gaze steadily. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking, is there something I should know about why our former clients are suddenly finding better alternatives?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. David suspected what was happening, but he couldn't prove it and couldn't confront me directly without risking legal complications. "Your former clients are sophisticated business leaders," I said carefully. "They evaluate vendors based on competence, reliability, and strategic value. If they're choosing alternatives to Meridian, perhaps you should examine whether Meridian is still providing competitive solutions." David's jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me, Marcus. I built this company from nothing, and I know when someone is working against us." "I'm not working against anyone, David. I'm working for my clients, helping them make informed decisions about technology partnerships. If those decisions happen to favor Meridian's competitors, that's a reflection of relative value propositions, not personal vendettas." "Cut the corporate speak," David snapped. "You're systematically destroying everything we built together." I set down my water glass and looked him directly in the eyes. "No, David. You destroyed what we built together when you decided that 15 years of relationships and expertise could be replaced by recent college graduates and fresh perspectives. You destroyed it when you chose spreadsheet optimization over strategic partnerships. You destroyed it when you convinced yourself that loyalty and results mattered less than salary savings and generational demographics." The accusation hit home. David's face flushed, and his hands clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. "We needed to modernize," he said defensively. "The board was pressuring us to reduce costs and improve efficiency. So you decided to eliminate the person who generated 73% of your new revenue over the past 5 years. You decided to bet the company's future on 3 untested junior employees who had never managed enterprise accounts. You decided that Rebecca's PowerPoint presentations were more valuable than client relationships that took decades to build." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the numbers on his phone screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "What would it take to fix this?" "Fix what, exactly?" "Our client relationships. Our revenue pipeline. Our reputation in the market." He looked up at me with something approaching desperation. "What would it take to undo the damage?" I considered the question seriously, running through the various scenarios and possibilities. The truth was that some of the damage was irreversible. Trust, once lost, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild in the enterprise software market. Honestly, David? I'm not sure it can be fixed. You didn't just lose clients, you lost credibility. Word travels fast in the manufacturing community, and right now, Meridian is known as the company that can't deliver on its promises. "But hypothetically," David pressed, "if someone wanted to rebuild those relationships, how would they go about it?" I studied his face, trying to determine whether this was genuine curiosity or a setup for some kind of legal action. David had always been straightforward in our business dealings, but desperation makes people unpredictable. "Hypothetically," I replied, "they would need someone with deep industry knowledge and existing client relationships. Someone who understands both the technical requirements and the political dynamics of enterprise sales. Someone who has credibility with decision makers at major manufacturing companies. Someone like you." "Someone like me, yes. But also someone who has no incentive to work for a company that demonstrated such poor judgment in its personnel decisions." David nodded slowly. "What if we could provide those incentives?" "What are you proposing?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside was a formal employment offer with terms that made my eyes widen despite my efforts. To remain composed, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. Base salary of $280,000, nearly double what I had been earning. Equity package worth potentially millions if the company recovered. Complete autonomy over client relationship management. A $2 million signing bonus. Most importantly, full authority to rebuild the business development team according to my own specifications. "This is generous," I admitted, closing the folder. "But it doesn't address the fundamental problem." "Which is?" "The fundamental problem is that your current clients don't trust Meridian anymore. They found better alternatives, and they're actively recommending those alternatives to their colleagues. Even if I came back tomorrow, it would take years. To rebuild the relationships you've destroyed. David's shoulders sagged. So there's nothing we can do? I considered lying to him, offering false hope that might extract additional concessions or commitments. But David had been a mentor early in my career, and despite everything that had happened, I still felt some obligation to provide honest counsel. There might be one option, I said slowly. But it would require acknowledging some uncomfortable truths about what went wrong. I'm listening. The companies that have left Meridian aren't just unhappy with your service levels. They're actively warning other potential clients about their experiences. Every failed implementation, every missed deadline, every unresolved technical issue becomes a cautionary tale that damages your reputation further. David nodded grimly. I understand that part. What's the solution? The solution is to focus on what Meridian does best and stop trying to compete in markets where you can't deliver superior value. Accept that you've lost the enterprise manufacturing sector, at least for now, and pivot to smaller clients where your remaining team can actually provide adequate service. Abandon our biggest revenue source? Your biggest revenue source is already gone, David. Trying to chase those clients will only generate more failures and more negative references. Better to build credibility with smaller clients and gradually work your way back up the market over the next 5 to 10 years. The suggestion clearly wasn't what David wanted to hear. He had built Meridian's reputation on serving enterprise clients, and the idea of retreating to smaller accounts felt like admitting defeat. There has to be another way, he insisted. What if we could convince some of our former clients to give us another chance? I shook my head. Those clients have moved on, David. They're working with vendors who understand their businesses and can deliver results. They're not going to risk their operations on Meridian's potential for improvement. Even if you were leading the effort? Especially if I were leading the effort. My credibility with those clients depends on providing objective advice that serves their best interests. If I started promoting Meridian's services after spending months helping them find better alternatives, they would question my motives and lose trust in my judgment. David stared at the employment offer, probably calculating how much it would cost to implement versus the potential return on investment. The math didn't work in Meridian's favor, and we both knew it. So this is it? He asked finally. 15 years of partnership, and it ends with you systematically dismantling everything we built? It ends with you making a series of strategic decisions that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term relationship management, I corrected. I'm just helping your former clients find vendors who can actually serve their needs. David closed the folder and slid it back across the table. I suppose I should have expected this response. What did you expect, David? That I would be grateful for the opportunity to fix the problems you created? That I would abandon my consulting clients to help you recover from Rebecca's strategic disasters? I expected that you might still care about the company you helped build. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had cared about Meridian, probably more than I should have. I had invested 15 years of my life in building something I thought would last, only to watch it dismantled by corporate politics and questionable strategic decisions. I did care about the company, I replied. But the company I cared about disappeared when you decided that relationships didn't matter as much as cost optimization. The company I cared about valued expertise and results over fresh perspectives and generational demographics. David stood up and left $50 on the table to cover our largely untouched meals. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished, Marcus. I'm satisfied that your former clients are getting better service from more competent vendors, I said. I'm satisfied that my recommendations are helping them solve real business problems instead of dealing with implementation failures and technical disasters. He walked away without responding, leaving me alone with the employment offer and the uncomfortable realization that I felt no remorse about Meridian's decline. That evening, I called Jennifer Park to update her on the conversation. She had landed a position with Nexus Systems and was thriving in an environment that valued her experience and institutional knowledge. Did you consider taking his offer? She asked after I described the meeting. For about 30 seconds, I admitted. The money was tempting, but the situation is irreparable. Meridian's reputation is too damaged to recover quickly, and I would be starting from a worse position than when I left. Plus, you're doing better as an independent consultant. Much better. April generated $340,000 in revenue, and May is already booked at $280,000. I'm working with more interesting clients on more challenging projects, and I don't have to deal with corporate politics or strategic restructuring initiatives. Jennifer laughed. From what I hear, David fired Rebecca the day after Rockwell's contract termination became public. Apparently, the board finally realized that her approach wasn't working. Too little, too late. The damage is done, and the market has moved on. The next morning brought confirmation of just how thoroughly the market had moved on. Apex Manufacturing announced a $19 million contract with Dataflow Technologies for a comprehensive supply chain optimization platform. James Morrison personally called to thank me for the vendor recommendation and to hire me as the implementation oversight consultant. This is exactly what we needed, James told me. Dataflow's technical team understands our business model immediately, and their proposed timeline is half what Meridian estimated for a similar scope. The Apex contract was the final nail in Meridian's coffin for the enterprise manufacturing sector. With Rockwell, Titanium Industries, Continental Logistics, Precision Components, Stellar Manufacturing, and now Apex all working with different vendors, Meridian had lost virtually every major client I had brought them over the past decade. More importantly, these successful implementations were generating referrals and recommendations that benefited my consulting practice and the vendors I worked with. Each project's success created opportunities for additional business and strengthened my reputation as someone who could identify superior solutions and ensure successful outcomes. By the end of April, I was managing consulting projects worth over $1.2 million in aggregate value, with additional proposals pending review. My client base had expanded to include 37 different manufacturing companies across 12 states. The network I had spent 15 years building for Meridian's benefit was now working exclusively for my own practice and my client's success. The relationships, expertise, and industry knowledge that Rebecca had dismissed as replaceable had become the foundation of a thriving independent consulting business. David's desperate lunch meeting had only confirmed what I already knew: Meridian's strategic error was irreversible. And my decision to build an alternative career path had been absolutely correct. The company that had let me go to focus on young talent was now facing bankruptcy while I was building the most successful phase of my professional career. 6 months after David's desperate plea for reconciliation, I received an email that brought everything full circle. The subject line read, "Meridian Tech Solutions, Asset Liquidation Auction." The sender was Hartwell and Associates, a bankruptcy consulting firm specializing in technology company dissolutions. I opened the attachment to find a comprehensive catalog of Meridian's assets scheduled for auction: office furniture, computer equipment, software licenses, and most tellingly, their client database and intellectual property portfolio. The company that had once been valued at $200 million was being dismantled and sold piece by piece. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was reading about Meridian's liquidation while sitting in my new office in downtown Austin, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Henderson Strategic Consulting had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 12 specialists, generating over $3.2 million in annual revenue. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as a desire for professional revenge had evolved into something far more significant: a consulting practice that genuinely improved how manufacturing companies approach technology partnerships. My phone buzzed with a call from Thomas Bradley at Nexus Systems. Over the past year, Thomas had become more than just a vendor partner. He was a strategic ally who helped shape how we approached complex implementation projects. "Marcus, I assume you saw the Meridian news," Thomas said without preamble. "Just got the liquidation notice. When did they file for Chapter 11? Last Friday. Apparently, they've been operating at a loss for 8 months straight. The board finally pulled the plug when their latest funding round fell through." I walked to my window, watching the afternoon traffic crawl across the Congress Avenue Bridge. "What's the timeline for the auction?" "September 15th. I'm thinking about bidding on their software development team and some of the intellectual property. Could be valuable assets if we can integrate them properly." Thomas was right to consider the opportunity. Despite Meridian's catastrophic management failures, they had developed some genuinely innovative technology solutions. In the right hands, with proper leadership and strategic direction, those assets could generate significant value. "Are you planning to attend the auction?" Thomas asked. "I might. Could be interesting to see who shows up." After ending the call, I reviewed my calendar for the past year. The growth had been extraordinary by any measure. Henderson Strategic Consulting now employed 3 senior analysts, 4 implementation specialists, 2 data scientists, and a business development coordinator. We had consulting agreements with 47 manufacturing companies and vendor partnerships with 15 technology providers. More importantly, we had established a reputation for delivering results. Every major project we'd managed had finished on time and under budget. Every vendor recommendation had led to successful implementations and satisfied clients. Our client retention rate was 100%, and our referral rate was generating more opportunities than we could handle. the success had attracted attention from private equity firms interested in acquiring consulting practices with proven track records in the enterprise technology space. 3 different firms had approached me about potential partnerships or acquisitions, with preliminary valuations ranging from $15 million to $22 million, but I wasn't ready to sell. The business was too much fun, and the market opportunity was still expanding. Manufacturing companies were finally recognizing that technology partnerships required strategic expertise, not just procurement processes. They needed advisors who understood both the technical requirements and the business implications of their decisions. My assistant, Rachel Torres, knocked on my door frame. "Your 3 p.m. appointment is here. Ms. Brennan from Consolidated Manufacturing." Linda. Brennan was the CEO of a $4 billion industrial equipment manufacturer based in Houston. She had contacted me after hearing about our work with Stellar Manufacturing, seeking guidance on a comprehensive digital transformation initiative worth potentially $50 million over 5 years. "Ms. Brennan, welcome to Austin," I said, rising to greet her. "I hope the flight was comfortable." Linda was in her mid-50s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees. She settled into the chair across from my desk and got straight to business. "Mr. Henderson, I'll be direct. Consolidated is facing the most significant technology upgrade in our company's history. We need to modernize everything from our manufacturing systems to our customer relationship management platforms. The board has approved a budget of $50 million, but frankly, I'm terrified of making the wrong choices." "What's driving the urgency?" I asked. "Competition from overseas manufacturers who are operating with more efficient systems. We're losing contracts because our proposal processes take twice as long as theirs, and our delivery timelines aren't competitive. If we don't modernize within the next 18 months, we'll lose market share that will be impossible to recover." I opened my tablet and showed Linda a case study from our work with Industrial Dynamics, a similar company that had undergone a comprehensive modernization project 2 years earlier. "This client faced identical challenges," I explained. "Aging systems, competitive pressure, complex integration requirements. We managed their vendor selection process and implementation oversight, finishing the project 6 months ahead of schedule and $8 million under budget." Linda studied the case study details. "What was your role specifically?" "We handled everything from initial requirements analysis to final system deployment. Our team evaluated 12 different technology providers, managed the competitive bidding process, negotiated contracts, and oversaw the entire implementation timeline." "And the results?" "Their proposal response time decreased by 70%. Manufacturing efficiency improved by 23%. Customer satisfaction scores increased by 31%. Most importantly, they won back 3 major contracts they had lost to overseas competitors." Linda leaned forward. "How long would a similar project take for Consolidated?" "Based on your company size and complexity requirements, I'd estimate 14 to 16 months for full deployment. We could have initial systems operational within 6 months, with phased rollouts for the remaining components." "What would your consulting fees be for managing the entire project?" "For a project of this scope, our management fee would be $750,000, plus performance bonuses tied to specific milestones and cost savings. If we deliver the project on time and under budget, our total compensation could reach $1.2 million. Linda nodded without hesitation. "When could we start?" "I'd need to review our current project commitments, but potentially within the next month. However, I should mention that our success rate depends heavily on working with vendors who can actually deliver on their promises. We only recommend technology providers with proven track records in projects of this complexity." "Do you have specific vendors in mind?" I pulled out a preliminary assessment I had prepared based on Consolidated's public information and industry positioning. "Based on your requirements, I'd recommend evaluating 5 primary vendors: Nexus Systems for core manufacturing integration, Dataflow Technologies for analytics and reporting, Enterprise Solutions Group for customer relationship management, Industrial Software Alliance for supply chain optimization, and TechCore Solutions for cybersecurity and data protection." Linda recognized several of the names. "These are all Meridian competitors." "They're all companies that specialize in enterprise manufacturing solutions," I corrected. "Some happen to compete with Meridian, but that's not the primary selection criterion. These vendors were chosen based on their technical capabilities, implementation expertise, and track records with similar projects." "What about Meridian itself? Are they an option?" I paused, considering how to address the question diplomatically. "Meridian filed for bankruptcy last week. They're no longer accepting new clients." Linda's eyebrows rose. I hadn't heard that news. What happened to them? Strategic missteps and execution failures. They lost focus on client service and made personnel decisions that undermined their core competencies. It's actually a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining experienced teams in complex technology implementations. Interesting. Timing. Were you involved with Meridian previously? I was their senior VP of business development for 15 years before starting my consulting practice. I'm familiar with their strengths and weaknesses, which helps inform my current vendor assessments. Linda smiled knowingly. So you've seen both sides of the technology partnership equation. Exactly. I understand what works and what doesn't from both vendor and client perspectives. That experience helps ensure successful outcomes for our consulting clients. We spent the next hour reviewing consolidated specific requirements and developing a preliminary project timeline. Linda signed a consulting agreement before leaving, authorizing us to begin the vendor evaluation process immediately. As her car pulled away from our building, I realized that the consolidated project represented more than just another lucrative consulting engagement. It symbolized how completely the market dynamics had shifted over the past 18 months. 18 months ago, Linda would have called Meridian directly to discuss her technology needs. I would have been the person managing her account, trying to position Meridian's solutions for her requirements. The entire conversation would have been constrained by corporate politics and predetermined product offerings. Instead, she was now paying me substantially more money to provide genuinely objective advice about the best vendors for her specific needs. I could recommend whichever solutions would actually serve her best interests, without worrying about internal sales quotas or competitive positioning. The transformation was complete. I had gone from being an employee constrained by corporate limitations to being an independent advisor with the freedom to provide optimal solutions for my clients. That evening, I drove out to Jennifer Park's new house in Westlake Hills for a celebration dinner. Jennifer had been promoted to Vice President of Client Relations at Nexus Systems and was thriving in her new role. She had invited me to meet her new boyfriend, a software engineer named Craig who worked for one of Austin's emerging tech startups. Marcus. Jennifer greeted me at the door with a genuine smile. Come in, come in. Craig's been looking forward to meeting you. Craig turned out to be a thoughtful guy in his early 30s who had heard stories about our Meridian experiences. Over dinner on Jennifer's back patio, he asked the question that everyone seemed curious about. Do you ever feel bad about what happened to Meridian? Craig asked. I mean, a lot of people lost their jobs when the company went under. I considered the question seriously. It wasn't the first time someone had challenged me about the ethics of my actions, and it probably wouldn't be the last. I feel bad that people lost their jobs, I replied. But I don't feel responsible for Meridian's bankruptcy. They made strategic decisions that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term client relationships. Those decisions created the conditions that led to their downfall. But you actively steered clients away from them, Craig pressed. I provided objective advice to clients about their technology needs. If that advice led them to choose vendors other than Meridian, it's because those vendors could provide better solutions. Jennifer jumped into the conversation. Craig, you have to understand what it was like working there toward the end. The new management team couldn't handle enterprise accounts. They were making promises they couldn't keep and creating disasters for clients who depended on their systems. So Marcus was actually protecting those clients from bad service? Craig asked. Exactly, Jennifer confirmed. Every company that left Meridian ended up with better technology solutions and more reliable vendor relationships. Marcus's recommendations saved them from implementation failures and technical disasters. Craig nodded thoughtfully. I guess it's like being a doctor who recommends patients switch to a different hospital because the current one isn't providing adequate care. That's a good analogy, I agreed. My obligation was to help clients make informed decisions based on their best interests, not to protect Meridian from the consequences of their poor strategic choices. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Craig's question lingered in my mind during the drive home. The truth was that I didn't feel guilty about Meridian's collapse. Their leadership had made decisions that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how enterprise technology partnerships actually work. Rebecca's youth-oriented business development approach had been destined to fail from the beginning. Enterprise software sales requires deep industry knowledge, established relationships, and proven expertise. You can't replace 15 years of experience with enthusiasm and fresh perspectives. More importantly, my consulting clients were genuinely better off working with the vendors I had recommended. Every implementation had been successful. Every project had delivered measurable business value. Every client relationship had been strengthened through positive outcomes. The real measure of success wasn't Meridian's bankruptcy. It was the fact that 47 manufacturing companies now had more efficient operations, better technology solutions, and stronger vendor partnerships because of my advice. 2 weeks later, I attended Meridian's asset liquidation auction at a hotel conference center near the airport. The room was filled with technology executives, private equity representatives, and bargain hunters looking for discounted equipment and software licenses. David Castellanos was there, looking haggard and defeated as he watched pieces of his life's work being sold to the highest bidders. He noticed me across the room but didn't approach. We simply nodded at each other with mutual acknowledgement of how things had ended. Thomas Bradley won the bidding for Meridian's core software development team and several key intellectual property assets. The total purchase price was $4.2 million, a fraction of what those assets had been worth when Meridian was operational. Interesting day, Thomas commented as we walked to the parking garage after the auction. Closure, I replied. The last chapter of a story that started 15 months ago. Any regrets? I thought about the question as we reached our cars. No regrets about the outcome. Regrets about how it started, maybe. I really did believe in what we were building at Meridian. You built something better, Thomas pointed out. Henderson Strategic Consulting is providing more value to more clients than Meridian ever did. He was right. My consulting practice had evolved into something more significant than revenge against a former employer. It had become a genuine solution to a real market problem, the need for objective, expert guidance in an increasingly complex technology landscape. That night, I sat in my home office reviewing the financial projections for Henderson Strategic Consulting. Year 2 revenues were on track to exceed $5 million. We had consulting agreements with 63 companies and vendor partnerships across 17 different technology categories. More importantly, we had established a sustainable business model that aligned our success with our clients' success. Every recommendation we made was designed to deliver optimal outcomes for the companies that trusted our judgment. The phone rang, interrupting my analysis. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Marcus Henderson. Mr. Henderson, this is Angela Morrison from Pacific Manufacturing Group. I got your name from Linda Brennan at Consolidated. She spoke very highly of your consulting services. Thank you for calling, Angela. How can I help you? We're planning a $75 million technology modernization initiative, and Linda suggested we talk to you about managing the vendor selection process. Do you have time for a preliminary discussion? I opened my calendar and smiled. The network effect that had once worked for Meridian was now working for me, generating opportunities that exceeded anything I had imagined when this journey began. I'd be happy to discuss your project, Angela. When would be convenient for you? As we scheduled our meeting, I realized that David had been wrong about one fundamental thing. He had accused me of systematically destroying everything we had built together, but I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply taken the relationships, expertise, and industry knowledge that I had developed over 15 years and used them to build something better. Something that provided genuine value to clients without the constraints of corporate politics and strategic missteps. Meridian's collapse wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much better one. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.